One of the myths surrounding you is that some people in the West think of you as a living God. Not only is that not true, it is also blasphemous.
Absolutely. I mean, as you know, the faith of Islam was revealed at a time when the Arabian continent was idolatrous. And idolatry, all forms of idolatry, are totally prohibited by Islam.
One of the...
Everybody makes mistakes, but correct them. But there's no such thing as a perfect world or a perfect life.
It's a question I cannot help asking. Why do we find that the angriest Muslims in the world come from Pakistan? Not all Pakistani Muslims, but still, if you look at the record of angry Muslims discovered around the world post 9/11, even before that, how come so many of them come from Pakistan, whereas Iraq was invaded, Afghanistan was occupied, continues to be so in many ways. Palestinians have a grievance, but the angriest Muslims are in Pakistan.
I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't agree with that. I think there's anger that is in many, many Muslim countries today, because I think the Ummah feels targeted, and targeted essentially for 9/11.
Right.
And the Ummah, as a body of millions and millions of people around the world, had nothing to do with that. So I don't think that comment is, if I may say so, is fair.
No, I wonderfully to disagree with that. It's easy to agree with those formulations these days.
Yes, but in my view, that's really not the case.
So I'm happy if you agree with me, but I'm happier if you don't agree with me, because it's a better story, frankly.
Yes.
Because then we get into an argument.
No, I don't.
An intellectual argument.
I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's correct. And you know, I would go further and I would say many of the conflicts we see today have got nothing to do with faith.
Right.
They are the children of political mismanagement or worse.
Perhaps the most important area of incomprehension outside the Ummah is the conflict between the Sunni and Shia interpretations of Islam and the consequences for the Sunni and Shia peoples. This powerful tension is sometimes even more profound than conflicts between Muslims and other faiths. It has increased massively in scope and intensity recently, and has been further exacerbated by external interventions. In Pakistan and Malaysia, in Iraq and Syria, in Lebanon and Bahrain, in Yemen and Somalia and Afghanistan, it is becoming a disaster. It is important, therefore, for non-Muslims who are dealing with the Ummah to communicate with both Sunni and Shia voices. To be oblivious to this reality would be like ignoring, over many centuries, that there were differences between Catholics and Protestants, or trying to resolve the civil war in Northern Ireland without engaging both Christian communities. What would have been the consequences if the Protestant-Catholic struggle in Ireland had spread throughout the Christian world, as is happening today between Shia and Sunni Muslims in more than 9 countries? It is of the highest priority that these dangerous trends be well understood and resisted. De mon discours de m'adresser à vous à nouveau en français. Je viens d'évoquer les incompréhensions entre le monde industrialisé.
One of the things you talked about in your speech to the Canadian Parliament this week was something you've brought up before that concerns you, and the clash of ignorance. While some talk about clash of civilizations, you talk about the clash of ignorance between civilizations, especially between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. We talked about this 6 years ago, with your hope being that time would change that. Now, I don't think you were talking in 6-year intervals, you were talking longer than that, but nevertheless, one can look back over the last 6 years and say, has there been any headway?
I'm just as concerned. I'm just as concerned.
Well, but one of the things on this issue that I found interesting was that you almost had to walk through the basic history, not only of your own time, but the basic history of the Muslim world and the divisions within it, to the Parliament of Canada. I mean, when we talk about the clash of ignorance,
well, that's it.
But
that's it.
It's that basic, though.
It's that basic. And when we talked some years ago, it's so basic that it could be part of general education around the world, simply so that communities, countries understand what are the dynamic forces in those societies. It's not new. It's been there a long, long time. So the change process doesn't mean that you have clarity. The change process opens the door to change. Obviously is a crisis between the Shia and Sunni communities. I think that crisis is now extending throughout the region, and I mentioned today that it's actually active in 9 countries. I mean, if you make a parallel with the Christian world, what would have been the Christian world's reaction if the Irish crisis had been active in 9 countries? It would have been a very, very serious issue. That's what we are facing today. That crisis is in 9 countries, and it is likely to expand further.
But what is the way out? I mean, the Western world has no credibility in trying to deal with that issue in a helpful way in those countries?
It's very difficult to generalize about the problem, because it can be an economic problem, it can be an educational problem, it can be a demographic problem. It has different dimensions. So I think you have to dissect the problem to understand exactly what is happening. But at a certain stage, there's got to be an acceptance in the national policy and applied by government that pluralism in the domain of faith is part of national rights. It's that simple. Pluralism has to be defended. And I'm not sure that we know all the answers. And in fact, probably the answer is in terms of reducing tension rather than eliminating it. You probably can't eliminate it totally, any more than you could in the Christian world, frankly.
But getting there
is very complex. Very, very complex. And I'm not a person who's going to say to you that I know all the answers. And I'm not a person who's going to say to you that I know all the answers. What I do know is that whatever is occurring has to be looked at very carefully, and it has to be brought under control.
But it always comes down to the who does that?
Well, essentially government.
Governments in the individual countries?
Yes. Yes, and I think probably amongst the communities they could agree.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين.